What do you think would have happened if Mufasa would have banished Scar from the Pride Lands? For years, Scar was allowed to deviate from tradition and threaten his brother's friends. He openly disrespected his nephew and mocked his brother's authority as king. In the storybook A Tale of Two Brothers, we're shown that from the time Scar was a cub, he was constantly attempting to embarrass his brother. And in the series The Lion Guard, we're told that Scar murdered lions within the Pride when they refused to help him take down Mufasa. Scar repeatedly acted against Mufasa and the Circle of Life, but because Scar was Mufasa's younger brother, no matter how many times Mufasa was betrayed, he refused to stop looking after him. Even though there were clear signs that Scar was filled with rage, resentment, and frustration, Mufasa allowed those emotions to fester.
Oh no, Mufasa. Perhaps you shouldn't turn your back on me.
Mufasa just couldn't bring himself to banish a member of his own family, and while I think there's some honor in that, he also didn't take the necessary steps to create peace with his brother. If Mufasa would have had the conviction to put the safety of his family and his kingdom before his love for his brother, I think the Pride Lands could have avoided a lot of suffering. But instead of taking action, Scar was permitted to live in Pride Rock while he secretly forged alliances and formulated plots that directly led to the king's death and instability rising across the Pride Lands. You see, long before Mufasa, there was a precedent set by great kings of the past that allowed the king to banish animals from the kingdom. When animals threatened the Circle of Life, they had to be handled so that balance could persist within the Pride Lands. Shenzi's clan of hyenas is a perfect example of that kind of situation. The reason Shenzi, Banzai, and Ed lived within the elephant graveyard throughout Mufasa's reign was because at some point their clan was banished from the Pride Lands. You see, Shenzi's hyenas and their descendants felt like they could go where they pleased and freely kill any animal they wanted, even though that wasn't their true purpose.
We're the cleanup crews, picking up after all the sloppy eaters. We hyenas eat what you lions leave behind.
The hyenas, though, aren't the only animals that we've seen banished across the history of the Pride Lands. You see, when Mufasa's son Simba reclaimed the throne, he banished members of the Pride Lands to solidify his place as king. Only this time, the animals were other lions.
Why would Simba banish other lions?
Because Zira and her family, they were loyal only to Scar.
Once Zira attacked Simba, he felt he had no choice but to force Zira, her family, and her followers to leave the Pride Lands. And for years, he enforced that banishment.
I banished you from the Pride Lands. Now you and your young cub, get out.
If Mufasa would have utilized his power as king to banish Scar after any of his acts of rebellion, Scar would have become pretty powerless. You see, Scar's banishment from the Pride Lands would have resulted in him being unable to rise to power in any kind of diplomatic way. Specifically, the tactics Scar used to actually rise as king would no longer have been able to work because he would have been completely removed from the line of succession. And there would have been a shared understanding across the Pride Lands that he was not someone who could be trusted. Not only would there have been no way for Scar to take out his brother and nephew by manipulating them into manufactured dangerous situations, but even if Mufasa and Simba died by some cause, the lionesses would not have embraced Scar as their next king. Honestly, in an unfortunate scenario where the king and his son both passed while Scar was banished, my assumption is that Sarabi would become queen of the Pride Lands. The only way then for Scar to become king would have been through violence, but obviously Scar knew that he could not win a challenge against Mufasa.
I wouldn't dream of challenging you.
He wouldn't be able to become king by ceremonially fighting his brother one-on-one, so he would most likely have turned to the hyenas if he wanted any chance of taking Pride Rock for himself. The truth is, though, that any kind of open assault on Pride Rock by Scar and the hyenas would have absolutely failed. If Scar attempted to take control with a hyena army, Mufasa and the lionesses would have been ready. I mean, we're shown in Simba's youth that patrols were established to detect when hyenas would arrive in the Pride Lands.
Hyenas in the Pride Land!
While they weren't perfect at all times, Mufasa absolutely would be notified if there were suddenly dozens of hyenas entering the Pride Lands at the same time. Also, through the Battle of Pride Rock, we're shown that the full might of Scar's hyena army was no match for the lionesses of the Pride Lands, so Scar and the hyenas would not have been able to take over the Pride Lands in any kind of major attack. But a different outcome might occur if Scar built up a larger army. In the Lion Guard, when Scar was brought back as a fiery ghost in the Outlands, he assembled a collection of different animal factions to build a new army. In addition to recruiting the hyenas, he was also assisted by jackals, crocodiles, skinks, and vultures. Maybe if Scar was banished to the Outlands, he might have been able to bring together this kind of army before his death. But when all animals in the Pride Lands fought against Scar's army of Outlanders in the Lion Guard, again, Scar's army was never able to be victorious. The only advantage the Pride Lands would not have against Scar's army of Outlanders that was present during their victory during the events of the Lion Guard was the Lion Guard itself. That group could only be assembled after Simba's son Kion was born, or if Simba had a younger sibling to form the Guard. But I think Mufasa and the animals of the Pride Lands would still be able to hold off Scar's forces without them, especially if the battle took place before the devastating drought that was experienced during Scar's rule as king. The only way I think Scar could have actually taken out Mufasa or Simba is if he could ambush them when they were alone. This was the tactic used by the Lions of the Outlands to attempt to take Simba's life in The Lion King 2, and I think it could have been an effective strategy, especially against Simba when he was just a cub. But again, that could only happen if Scar and his followers were able to covertly enter the Pride Lands and somehow find them alone. But I do think Scar could have found someone he trusted in Pride Rock to help his army target the king and his son. You see, Scar was said to have a close relationship with the lioness Zira during his reign as king, and by the time of his death, he had grown a loyal following of lionesses who saw him as the true leader of the Pride Lands. If he had forged any kind of bond with Zira before his banishment, or was able to establish it after he was sent away, she could have been a dangerous ally. I mean, Zira could have individually taken out Simba as a cub within Pride Rock, or she could have been the lioness who lured Mufasa to an ambush, or into a stampede. But of course, all of this would only be able to happen if Scar and Zira's deceit was able to remain hidden. I'm sure if Mufasa had accepted that Scar needed to be banished, he would have become much more willing to remove other lions who had an allegiance to his younger brother. There were a lot of avenues for Scar to explore after he was banished, but for the most part, his banishment would have left him in a much weaker position than the one he had as a member of the Pride Lands. While I think it's extremely unlikely that Scar would go quietly to another place to create his own pride, I think he would have found a lot more happiness letting go of his hatred for his brother and forging a new life for himself. But I don't think that was the way things would ever play out. If Scar couldn't humble himself enough to walk away from the Pride Lands, then I think he would have kept fighting. And if the choice came between allowing the Pride Lands to be caught up in a destructive war or taking out his brother, I would hope that Mufasa would make the difficult decision to create peace. I'm sure it would have broken Mufasa's heart to end his brother's life, but there's a part of me that thinks that might be the only way Mufasa and Scar's rivalry could have ever ended. As we know from The Lion King, if Mufasa remained unwilling to act against his brother, Scar would not stop until he found a way to take him down. But if Mufasa could have remained the king, I think he could have kept the peace. He would have ensured that animals who abused the circle of life would have remained unable to damage the Pride Lands through overpredation. And during the inevitable drought across the kingdom, Mufasa could have instituted policies like his grandfather Muhatu had in the story The Brightest Star. By limiting the amount of water all animals consumed and ensuring no fighting amongst the animals could have occurred, the death and destruction caused by the drought could have been minimized. He could have kept the Pride Lands together, and he could have been there for his son. If Scar was banished from the Pride Lands, Mufasa could have ensured that Simba grew up with his mother and father alive and present in his life. He could have guided his son through each step on his path to become king without all of the trauma, suffering, and pain he had to endure as a cub. Simba could have absorbed all of the wisdom that his father had to offer so that he wouldn't be controlled by fear, mistrust, and rage early into his reign. Maybe Mufasa and Sarabi could have also given Simba a sibling. They could have given him someone he could have relied on and trusted, someone to be his best friend through all the ups and downs. And that would have also allowed Simba to have a lion guard by his side as king. With Mufasa present in Simba's life, I don't think he would have just been able to make him a better king. I think Mufasa could have provided his son with a better life. But what do you think would have happened if Mufasa would have banished Scar? Let me know in the comments, along with any other ideas you have for future videos about The Lion King. And finally, I'm Isaac Carlson. Thanks for watching, and have a magical day.